Back of house at midnight, names by noon. My name is Levi and I sell certainty by the plate. I'm the maitre d' at a rooftop restaurant that believes it is a secret glass brass, a view that inflates proposals and justifies mistakes. On paper, my job is seating charts, wait lists, the choreography of bread and apology. In practice, it's attention. I watch for the exact second a guest decides to forgive a kitchen, when a fork pauses above sauce and you can hear the room inhale like a choir. I carry a pencil I whittle with a paring knife because I like the ritual, a tiny flashlight to read names written in dimness, and a book of floor plans that look like love letters to patience. I live with Samir. He's a journalist who believes facts deserve the same respect as grief. He comes home with ink on his wrist and a stiffness in his shoulders that has nothing to do with chairs. We keep a card taped to the fridge that says, "Say by noon." We wrote it after a year when we kept telling the right truths at the wrong hour. It's a foolish rule, but it is ours. The Tuesday the service cooperated and I didn't. The reservation sheet looked like a solved puzzle. The dishwasher hadn't resigned mid-shift. The pastry station hadn't set anything on fire. Our head server had remembered her sister's birthday at an appropriate decibel. At 5:53, just before doors, I watched the city blur itself into evening and felt that small swell in my chest that means a night might do what you want. At 6:20, my host whispered the name of a walk-in like a rumor you're not supposed to believe. "Cash and Vale," she said, and the consonants crossed their legs and waited to be asked. I looked over and saw the sort of face that knows where light is. He was alone, hands in his pockets, wearing a suit the color of consequence. He smiled in a way that made the air touch my throat from the inside. "I didn't book," he said, and there was no apology in it, just the kind of confidence that suggests an audience is already available. "We can make space at the counter," I said. "It's not a punishment." "I prefer penalties," he said lightly. "Could we negotiate?" He let his gaze rest on the corner banquette where the room goes to be interesting about privacy. 10 minutes, I said, because that's what I tell people when I mean 5 and resent them for needing 2. We gave him the corner. He circumvented the wine list by asking the sommelier to tell him a story instead. He listened like someone who knows the trick to seduction is attention pretending to be curiosity. During the third course, I brushed past his table to see if he needed anything, and he turned the question around. "What do you need?" he asked, and my answer was impolite enough that I swallowed it whole. He smiled as if he could hear the words sliding down my throat. At 9, the joint email account that Samir and I use for deliveries pinged my phone, and the hurt arrived with the politeness you expect from machines. "Thank you for your stay, the Halcyon Day Suite." Time, 12:073:03. Points, 200 added. The message didn't belong to my night, but it wrapped around it like wire. I kept serving other people's appetites while mine improved its posture. I didn't call. Our rule for things that are not yet disasters is 2 loops around the block before nomming them. My block is the service hallway that runs from kitchen to freight elevator, a lane of stainless steel and ghosts. I walked it twice. The ice machine coughed the sentence all machinery knows. "You already know." Samir texted at 10, "Running late, source won't let me go, I'm sorry," and I wrote back okay and felt how little the word could carry. 10 minutes later, Cashin stood at the host's stand with an expression that promised trouble on retainer. "Your city tastes good," he said. "It should be introduced to me again. Drinks." I was wearing my professionalism like starched linen. He accepted it the way some men accept a dare. "I'm in the hotel across the street," he said innocently. "It has the good ice." "I have a rule about across the street," I said. "Break it," he said, and he wasn't asking. He tilted his head the way people do when they want to see if your spine is a suggestion. The Halcyon's elevators are mirrors with ambitions. In the reflection, I saw the person I liked during daylight and the person I introduced to rooms after midnight. Cashin watched me watch myself. When the doors closed, he stepped close enough that my chest chose the verb. On 12, we walked down a carpet that believed in secrecy. He opened the door with his phone and that little blue light, and I left my rules in the hallway. He kissed me like a man who knows maps, every edge charted and a few ignored. He took my face in both hands like a photograph he intended to develop the old way. He asked me to breathe against his neck, and I did, speaking the language that doesn't need nouns. He undid my tie with a reverence I didn't deserve and laughed softly when I impatiently returned the favor. "You're good at inventory," he murmured. "How many bad ideas does that pocket hold?" "You'll be one of them," I said, and then he was not speaking and I was not thinking. There are ways to stand that are not standing. There are ways to confess that have no words. He pressed me back onto the sofa and asked, "Here?" without a full sentence. I said yes, with a hand at his waist. The room smelled like lemons that had paid for an education. For a moment I was the version of myself that makes sense only when light forgets to argue. After, he poured us water and pretended we were beautiful for reasons that had nothing to do with skin. He asked my name again the way some men request guarantees. I gave it like a tip. "Levi," he repeated gently, testing the syllables for exits. "Tell me something only I will keep." I nearly said the thing about the email, about Samir's afternoon, about my rule and noon and how neither was working. Instead, I told him the truth I tell strangers to feel safer. I seat people so they believe they belong. "Do you?" he asked, and didn't mean my guests. "Tonight," I said, "I'm practicing." I went home at 1, smelling like someone else's good sheets. Samir was asleep, face down, hand under his cheek like a confession he'd forgotten to make. I watched him for a long time because daylight lives in the human face when it's unguarded. In the morning I made coffee because that is the apology Americans drink, and he came into the kitchen and kissed me without editing. "How was service?" he said, and heard the part I didn't answer. I asked casually how his day had been. He looked at the card on the fridge and decided to be brave. "I met a source at the Halcyon," he said. "We needed privacy. I should have told you before everything became a noun." He rinsed his cup like he was cleaning the word. "I didn't sleep with him," he added, and there were 2 ways to hear it and I heard the wrong one. I nodded because I couldn't think of a sentence that doesn't leave splinters. We said none of the things carefully, and then we said all of the things badly. He asked me if I believed him. I asked him if he wanted me to. He pushed his hands into his hair and looked like a teenager who had met consequences too early. He said he loved me twice, once with his mouth and once with his eyes. I went to work and told strangers where they belonged and could not tell myself. Intrigue is easy. Housekeeping is hard. Attention is a hungry god. The woman in 1213 checked in with a wedding ring that wasn't a fit for her hand and a man who reveled in mispronouncing the staff's names. The VIP in 905 requested a quieter refrigerator because his conscience insisted on sleep. A delivery of oysters arrived with the arrogance of a family that knows its ancestors. Through all of it, my phone became a hazard. At 5, the reservation system flashed red for a cancellation we hadn't requested. The name was familiar, Cashin. I looked up and he was already at the bar, leaning toward the sommelier, listening as if he needed a witness. He glanced at me with an expression that translated to, "It was delightful and it wasn't enough." I was not available for translation. Samir texted me a photograph of our dining table with 2 plates and the caption, "Try again." I typed yes, and felt how a word can be loyal to 2 meanings at once. At 10:30, Cashin slipped me a folded napkin that had a room number written in the careful, infuriating strokes of someone who expects to be obeyed. I put it in my pocket like a live wire. I told him good night in a tone I reserve for fire code violations. He raised his glass. "You can't seat everyone," he said. "Not even yourself." "I seat who pays," I said, and he smiled as if I'd lost more than the argument. I left the restaurant at 11:40, my body a tight arc toward home. Halfway down the block, I saw Samir across the street under the awning of the hardware store that closes on its own time. He stood with a man whose face I recognized from Section B. The man touched Samir's lapel in that small, decisive way strangers do only when they are invested. I stopped walking because stopping was all that didn't break. Samir looked up, saw me, and didn't flinch. He said my name, and it sounded like a verdict he hoped we both could live with. I had a pocket with a room number in it and a mouth that could do 100 consequences. I crossed the street and shook the man's hand because I am a man who knows how to behave until he doesn't. The man excused himself with civility, which felt like theft. Samir and I stood under the awning while rain tried to be theatrical around us. "Do you want to go upstairs?" he asked, "and do this the way we promised?" "Yes," I said, and didn't look at the corner of the napkin pressing against my thigh like a doorbell. We sat at our table with the bad card and the better rule, and we did the thing men do when there are two truths in the room. I told him about Cashin, not the details that would break us, only the ones that could keep us honest. He told me about the source, not the details that would excite me, only the ones that would make me grow up. He asked me if I would stop. I said I wanted to start again, and he understood the grammar. He said he would call the source and turn him into a story rather than a life. I said I would delete a room number and become a person rather than a story. The erotics of mercy are not subtle. We kissed like men choosing a subject, not a verb. He moved his chair around to my side because he has always preferred collaboration to debate. He put his hand on my throat gently, in that way that asks and then asks again. I said yes, and then said his name in a tone usually reserved for weather. We found our way to the bedroom like people who remembered why they learned the route. After, the city kept breathing. The rain stopped deciding and committed. The card on our fridge shook a little in the draft and stayed on the door. Samir fell asleep with his mouth slightly open, because even men who investigate power have small, ridiculous needs. I lay awake thinking about rooms and names, and the way hotels catalog sins the way libraries catalog hope. The next afternoon, Cashin sent a message that didn't pretend. "You were marvelous and you are a coward." I typed and erased and typed again. Then I wrote, "I'm seating myself elsewhere," and hit send before I could rename it. He replied, "Pity," with the punctuation of a man who hates being told that the mirror is temporary. I went downstairs to the restaurant a little early and rewrote the floor plan like a sermon. I moved a couple who were clearly lovers to the table under the olive tree because I wanted them to have shade when they ran out of cleverness. I gave the bar stool with the good sightline to a woman traveling alone because she needed the room to behave. I held a door for an old man who thanked me with his whole face. I texted Samir a photograph of our table with 2 plates and wrote, "Practice." At 7, the view convinced the sky to put on its better suit. At 8, a guest sent back a steak because he believed himself to be rare and wanted company. At 9, the pastry cook finally nailed the caramel the way you nail a confession. At 9:40, I did something I am ashamed of and proud of. I took the napkin with the room number out of my pocket, breathed in the ghost of a lemon I would not eat, memorized the numbers for 1 second too long, and then tore the paper in half and dropped it in the bin where we keep other people's mistakes. At 10, Samir arrived. He wore the shirt that forgives the world. He stood at the host's stand and said, "Table for two," like it was a line from a play he'd agreed to perform again. I sat him at the worst table in the room, right by the kitchen doors, because I wanted the heat to say what I couldn't. He laughed and said, "We'll manage," and the kitchen sighed, and the night did the generous thing nights do when you've been unkind. It gave us time. If you want the intrigue dressed and plated here. Rooms were open they shouldn't have been. Names were lies that told the truth about appetite. My body became a counterargument to my rules. But here is the other thing, the one I keep tucked behind the wine fridge with the spare corks. Men can point themselves. Tonight, with the city practicing forgiveness below us and the rain thinking about second chances, I am pointing at home. The switches of the city, if you'll believe me, keep trying to line themselves without complaint. For a few hours at a time they succeed, and for now that is the course we hold.